Good morning again. Not quite so rainy today, which is fantastic. A bit overcast. I had a message yesterday from someone who watches these morning broadcasts, who had a question about Mary Magdalene, and so it's quite impressive. You know, I felt a bit like Dan Walker on Breakfast TV. I can say I had a viewer wrote in asking a question, which is fantastic. So I just thought, well, I will do something very brief on Mary Magdalene. And Mary is an absolute fantastically interesting character. So but I ought to give folks a minute to kind of notice that I'm walking and talking. So I'll talk. So in a minute we will think a little bit about at least one aspect that we can bring to the story of Mary Magdalene. I do quite a lot of teaching on it when I do kind of days of teaching, either on the story of Jesus' ministry years or the last week. But quick, just to thank you as well to everyone who has subscribed over the last week or so. I now only need 16 more people to subscribe, and I can get my magical unique URL on YouTube. Who knows what one you get? You don't know until you actually try, see what's there. But it will also, that will all help. So thanks ever so much if you've subscribed. Another thing tonight actually is we'll be live streaming a much more detailed teaching. Normally lasts an hour and 20 minutes or so. From kind of I do some live teaching at Cookham, and we stream that. So if you want to join us for that, it'll be around 7:30, and that comes complete with notes and PowerPoint slides and so on, which we broadcast at the same time. And tonight we're looking for the next 2 weeks. In fact, we're looking at Jesus in the story of the major prophets, which will be kind of be fun and interesting, not too long. We won't be necessarily going deep into the detail because we're looking at much more of the kind of the flow and the development across those books. So anyway, back to today and some thoughts on the story of Mary Magdalene. Just because I know some people enjoy it, I'm going to just bring out there. Here you go. So some of you can actually see my dogs. I know that some of you will think, why on earth do I show you pictures of the dogs? Just to prove why I'm out here. And also because, perhaps a bit like our family, we've become obsessed with pictures of dogs. It seems that a huge amount of my communication with my children seems to be sending them pictures of the dogs. So I just assume that everybody thinks the same way. So let's come back to me. So Mary Magdalene, as we're saying. Yes, the problem when we look at the character of Mary Magdalene, and actually problem is not a great word, is it? It sounds like... But what's complicated is, of course, there are thousands of perspectives and a huge amount that's got written over long periods of the church, which is not the same as saying by the early church in particular, and that group and community in themselves. But over the years, an awful lot has been written. Most of it, or an awful lot of it, let's say, is legendary rather than actually based on fact. But there is also an awful lot really from the early traditions, and what we do know, of course, is Mary is a very key figure. So the thing I just wanted to draw out today, because it's just one piece, when I started looking at things like the characters in Scripture and so on, it's very easy when you start and you look just at one character to kind of come across an opinion, find a perspective, something that someone's written, and you go, yeah, that makes fantastic sense, and so you adopt a view. And then another time, as you do a bit more, you look at another character and think, oh, that makes perfect sense as well. And then you kind of start to realise, but the trouble with that is while those two things make perfect sense on their own, when you blend them together, the whole is not so convincing. And that's one of the kind of things I found as time has gone on, which it's, if we're going to get it, good morning, if we're going to get at the reality of the story, it's actually quite a complex one, because Mary is such a key figure, and she plops in to the middle of this incredible story, and the characters around her and how that story is getting written and so on, that actually there's a vast array of things we need to think about and consider. And so the view I now present when we do a whole day is a slightly more kind of layered and considered view. And it will be difficult to kind of prove it, if I put it that way, if proof is the right word, because it's very open to modification as time goes on. But actually it's been developed by modifying a little bit here, a little bit there, and so on. So this morning I just wanted to pull out one particular kind of factor, which is when the email was sent to me asking the question about Mary, it referred to Mary of Magdala, which is totally fair because loads of English Bibles put that. But it's an assumption right from the beginning, and it's actually one I do totally reject now, is the concept that Magdala in this context refers to the town, which is on the Sea of Galilee, so over on the west side, and that she came from there. Of course it's possible. If you just look at it all on its own, it's when you put it into the bigger context, it looks like there are better explanations. So the first thing just to kind of notice is that the word Magdalene, which means is thought to mean of Magdalene, just as Nazarene means of Nazareth. But actually the endings are slightly different in Greek, but that's just a technical point. But it's just in English they've come to us that way, Nazarene, Magdalene. So it makes obvious sense, she comes from Magdala. But actually the kind of whole naming convention and adding of nicknames is a lot more complicated. And one of the things that I noticed some years back, as I read through every reference to Mary, is that the Gospels never call her Magdalene as in someone from Magdala. They call her the Magdalene. It's always got the definite article at the beginning of her, at the beginning of the whenever it introduces her, whenever it refers to her. So she's not a person from Magdala, she's the person. It's a bit like, obviously, we had so I come from London, so I'm a Londoner. But if I call myself the Londoner, you'd ask the question, why? What makes you so special that you're the Londoner rather than just a Londoner? The phenomena, if you like, of taking a noun, because I'm going to say Magdala, of course, is a noun. It means it comes from Migdal, means a tower. So Magdalene can also mean having the quality of a tower, and that's an important thing to notice here. It's a bit like, though, if you imagine millions of years in the future, people uncover archived documents and they discover that someone comes from the town of Deal, so they're called a dealer. And then they discover that the Daily Mail doesn't think dealers are good people. And so they make the assumption that everyone who comes from Deal was a bad person, rather than understanding that deal is a noun. Sorry, it's a verb in this case, isn't it? And a dealer probably refers to someone who sells drugs. It's that kind of confusion. And I think there's something of this has gone on with the name Magdalene. She's got the quality of a tower because she's the Magdalene. Actually, sorry, I'm going off on tangents, but you see it actually in the Old Testament with the name Salmon, who appears in the book of Ruth and is part of Jesus' ancestry. The actual Hebrew of the book of Ruth sometimes refers to him as Salmon and sometimes as Salma, because Salma means to be clothed in something or is a garment, and once you turn it into a name by adding the on the end, it can sometimes be, he can get called either way. So often names that end in an on or an un, it's a bit like John becomes Johnny. In this case, Samun could also be called Salma. Simon can sometimes be Simei. It's that kind of thing you find quite regularly in Hebrew. It's a way of extending the word, making the name, giving it kind of a nickname, namey feel to it. And so in this context, Mary the Tower, Mary the Magdala, Mary the Magdalene, it has taken a concept and stretched it and turned it into a name, and it makes more sense to me because she is such a towering figure. People are often surprised what prompted the question. She's referred to as the Apostles' Apostle. She has such a foundational key figure as the witness of the resurrection, not just the witness, but the one who has that intimate connection in the resurrection, as she is there weeping in the garden and has that encounter with Jesus as the very first point, and is commissioned. That's why she's apostle. She's sent to the other apostles, who then Jesus appears to once she's brought the message to them, with the exception of Peter, who has a separate experience too. So she really is a tower within the early church. And the way she's introduced in the various Gospels, you notice everyone seems to know who she is, but nobody spells it out too explicitly. She's kind of an open secret for those who are in the know, which kind of makes sense, because obviously, particularly as you picked up over the last few days, if you've been following it, if I take an early view of the writing of the Gospels, particularly Mark and Matthew, she's actually being presented in a context where there is some persecution against the church. Sorry, it's now a little interesting thing. John's Gospel actually refers to her as being famous for what she does for Jesus in all of the world, without actually mentioning what she's famous for. That before he's actually told us that story. That's another. Some of you will notice, therefore, I've conflated Mary of Bethany with Mary Magdalene, but that's part of separate kind of follow-on teaching. It's got too many layers to it this morning. But that concept of Mary the Tower is a really appropriate nickname for what she's done, and it's also a name that is in people's minds because there is actually a tower in Jerusalem called Mariam. We often read it as Mariamne with an N, but actually the Hebrew is Miriam. It's the same name. Miriam the Tower, which is Mary Magdalene. And it's named, it was built by Herod for his second wife. His first wife had the name Doris, and he wanted to kind of make a slightly more politically advantageous union. So he marries Mariamne, who came from the Hasmonean dynasty, who were kind of ruling class within Jerusalem. And he loved her so much that he one day executed her. Sorry, that's not funny, is it? As he became paranoid, her family connections and the Hasmonean family were a threat to him. So he killed them all and felt within it to kind of make it complete, he ought to kill her too. And then he kind of felt so kind of full of remorse because he loved her so much and he wanted to honour her in front of the children she'd had and so on. So he built a tower, named it after her. So as you come into Jerusalem, in fact, it's not only is it into Jerusalem, but if we take a reasonably, one of the possible locations for the garden tomb, it's probably the route that is used in and out by Mary as she goes out from the city to the tomb. She would go under the shadow of the Mary Tower, the Miriam Magdala, the Miriam Magdalene. So you have this location. That's kind of that probably becomes part of the journey. As I went through this gate and I went out that way past the tower, you have a character whose role within the foundation of the resurrection experiences is so impressive. She takes on the name the Tower, Mary the Tower, and beyond that, actually within the church, she becomes the head of a whole division of the church. So we know that because there's I can't think of the guy's name now, but there's a Roman historian who writes critically of the growing Christian sects, and he makes a comment of the fact that they have different sects, and Mary, of course, Mary Magdalene is the head of one of those divisions, as is Simon Peter, you see. So we also know that within the early church she has this key role, being given some sort of administrative authority over a section of the church that's being reported to us by a critic of the church. That's always important from a historical point of view, because critics of the church aren't telling us things that they want to promote the story. They're telling us stuff that annoys them. And he looks in, and actually as he measures up the division, he also puts Salome, who's another of the female characters, as head of one of the divisions. So anyway, drawing it all together, the kind of single thrust that I wanted to add into the mix as we're thinking about who is the character of Mary Magdalene, is I'm 100% convinced now that actually we make it too simplistic, and the reason is, summing it up, she's always the Magdalene. She's not a Londoner, she's the Londoner, she's the Magdalene, which makes it much more to do with the Mary Tower in Jerusalem. Now, why has she got that name? Well, she might be tall, she might be statuesque. The word Migdala can be used of someone who is tall and impressive and fine looking and so on. So it's a kind of a qualitative word that can be used that way. So it could be a reference to her stature and physical height, but also, of course, it perhaps references the key role she has within the foundation story as the apostle to the apostles. And you put all of those bits together, and I think the fact that she's always called the Magdalene, which really emphasises the name, it's not just a simple descriptor of where she's come from. It's something much more that captures something of the quality, and we can kind of see that within the social context as to why that word, why Mary Magdala would become a kind of a fitting title for this character who plays such a key role in the resurrection narratives. So anyway, hopefully that's fired some interest this morning and got you thinking. I'm a great believer, it's not so much the final conclusion you come to about these things, but actually the process of exploring them, thinking about them, trying to get to know the people. The Holy Spirit uses that to engage us with these stories and with the experiences of 2,000 years ago, so that something that happened so long ago actually seems real and fresh to us. And so if that's all it's done, if it's made you think a bit more, then that's a great success. But until then, tomorrow I will sign off. I will leave you a final sight of the dogs, who are always very patient when I do these things. They run around a bit at first, and then they kind of come back and just hang around by me. So there we go. You want to say goodbye, Banjo? And what about you, Luna? You going to say goodbye? But until next time, it's been good to have time with you. If you can be one of those extra 16 I need by subscribing to the YouTube channel, that would be really fantastic. It'd be really nice to say, when it comes to my birthday, we now have a new URL. You're easy to find me online. So that'd be great if you could help in those ways. Thanks, Em.